Pseudo-intellectual inconsistencies, Diego Ruzzarin. If you don't take the risk of saying I can have a double relationship, or not commit to my responsibilities, or lose weight without getting rid of my bad habits, it is a delusion. Second, the pleasure received from a good decision is somehow proportional to the suffering of loss during the decision. By sacrificing we value more what is kept, what is selected. It is important to remember that the opposite of love is not hate, it is indifference. Many times it hurts more that someone who once loved you is completely indifferent to you than hates you, because hate is still a very emotional and very strong response. On the other hand, being indifferent is really cold. Be indifferent to someone who made you suffer, if you can go forward and leave it behind. It can be the worst torture since the one who hurt you expected an emotional response or a toxic game of painful revenge, the kind that really do not deserve revenge. That feeling of individual independence speaks of the weakness of the species, where to celebrate what makes me unique and distances me even more from the other, rejecting it. The horizon of collaboration that enhances human value is that ability to help others who are in need, as well as asking for help and acknowledging ourselves weak sometimes, and you are responsible for defining what abuse you are willing to tolerate and in exchange for what. Don't prostitute yourself cheap at least. Today it seems to me that doing nothing in the face of clear abuse is just as harmful as the one that perpetuates the abuse. We do not need a change for the sake of the poor wretches on the other side of the world, but for our own sake. We do not need a change for the sake of the poor wretches on the other side of the world, but for our own sake. Great ideas come from collaboration, from responsibility for the other, from the desire of the other, from identification with the other. Aspire to be more human on the path to success, not less. The joke reveals a lot, the flow reveals even more. In that sense my mistakes are my purest originalities. Mistakenly, the beginning was more the desire of others than mine. My only chance of originality reigned in my mistakes. If I want to be recognized, I first have to recognize the other as a consciousness like mine, that he is capable of recognizing me as I recognize him. Seeking recognition in individuality and in the ego is that absurd. He is the one who seeks to be recognized for his cars, for his houses, for his money, for those he considers less, and of course, he is not recognized by anyone because he does not recognize them. Self-awareness, or awareness of awareness itself, is achieved only in intersubjectivity and not in individualism. Resist individualism, the same one that promises unlimited freedom that, like a Trojan horse, wants the commoditization of humanity. The dominant ideology of our time seeks the dissolution of all social conventions, family, community, groups, etc., in the name of individual gain. Remember, the human being is an end in itself and not a human capital resource. He will not be as good as you hope or as bad as you despair. Each one comes only to the truth that he can tolerate. In that sense our mediocrity and ignorance determine our reality. In the end, philosophy has tried too hard to understand the world when the goal is to change it. Only the pursuit of wisdom can free us from the cave. Do not fall in love with knowledge, much less with your biases or what you think is knowledge and is nothing more than self-confirming hallucinations. It's great to say I don't know, I was wrong, you're right, I have no opinion, or better yet, learn something new. Many people in love with their knowledge judge others asleep, but knowledge is alive, it advances, it develops in front of us. Let's not just accept it just because, let's look for the right questions to be able to change the world. The myth of Sisyphus that shows us that although we cannot control our destiny, we can mean it, that is why nothing is more valuable than our values and our virtues. Decide which things are worth fighting for in your life, discover something that you love with passion and let it kill you. In these moments where we would like everything to be easier, simpler, faster and less painful, we reveal our childishness and how much it costs us to be responsible. There is no better time than a crisis to become aware of how things work. Who is more to blame, the one who does nothing to change his reality or the one who makes half-hearted attempts and finally perpetuates it? Sometimes we avoid difficult questions specifically because we already know the answer, and that answer is going to force us out of our ecstasy. It hurts to ask ourselves difficult questions because if we don't know how to answer them, we have to admit a gap, a lack, or simply admit the ambiguity of things. Difficult questions are the only ones that force us to face the reality of things, or at least to admit that we are adrift in an adverse sea without a map. The idea is not that we are libraries that recite ideas, but that the true merit is reading them, trying to understand them rigorously to the limit. You have the responsibility to consider the real application of the ideas you read, and even more if they are ideas that you defend. Very few people are free because being free implies being responsible for oneself. Making your own clothes, your own food, abandoning your family would make you free, but free to be miserable and die alone rather. We have to consider that freedom can only exist subservient to a kind of slavery. Slavery to our context, our society, and our desires. Before trying to answer the questions you ask yourself if those are really the right questions. If you don't think so, rephrase the question. It is a relief to remember that we are not alone. It's a relief to discover that even when you change your mind and leave behind a lot of people with whom you no longer share much in common, it doesn't mean you won't find new allies. Love is that which escapes definitions, it is like an excess of feeling. Love tends not to fit into definitions, the one who loves knows that words fall short when talking about the love that is felt. It will be because love itself is more like madness than reason. That the reason does not serve to explain it. I like to be crazy. A love between two people does not fit in the 3 times or in the 4 seasons or the 5 elements. Not even on the 6 strings of a guitar, fulfilling the 7 sins recorded on 8mm video inspired by the 9 muses. Love is my 10 fingers on your skin. Lacan says that love is nothing more than 2 faults that meet. It is not that the other has something that fills you, but that both are in their incompleteness. How not to fall in love with you after all the virtues I invented for you? As if my unconscious were playing a joke on me, I invented in you everything he wanted. You have everything I look for in a person. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy. Another way we learn to focus our desire is with prohibition. Nothing like not being able to do something so that this detonates as an irresistible pleasure. Of course it has to be that perverse rule that he says we shouldn't see each other, or should we? As long as the possibility is almost completely denied, the path is clear for the desire to manifest. Do not leave your house unless it is essential, or for love, at least. The less you really know about the other person, the more room there is for your fantasies to give texture to that loved one. The less you really know about the other person, the more room there is for your fantasies to give texture to that loved one. In some loves you cannot be happy and in love at the same time. Some loves are not there to give us happiness, some loves will only make us suffer. Most relationships end up by trying harder to be right than to understand the other. For one to win, the other has to lose. Many times by imposing and winning in an argument we lose the other, gaining what we were secretly looking for. There is no ideal time to do something. If the future is unpredictable, it is impossible to determine such a thing without feeling anxious about not knowing if a better time will come. What we do know is that today you still have a chance. In the end, what you wanted was an excuse. You probably already made the decision. You wanted an excuse to take a risk, or not to do it. Exposing yourself as a lover even knowing that they can hurt you is a test of courage for the weak. It is no longer the sexual that is indecent, but the sentimental. Love has become an obscenity, possessive, biased and selective. On the other hand, sex has become trivialized. It is the subject of music, photos, and casual chats. It is easier for them to make fun of you because you are in love than because you are excited. Only feelings, beyond love, or not, can make sex more than it is. We are no longer the good guys. No, good doesn't always win, and I don't think human beings are good by nature either. Rather, I believe that being a good person implies an enormous effort even against what our nature might be. It is almost our responsibility not to let that darkness that we have inside bring out the worst in us. Violence, when it has to be expressed, is the act of the weak, the cowardly, the desperate, and those who have lost real power. True power is that which never really has to be exercised, which expresses itself almost invisibly and manages to maintain order without ever exerting violence. What hurts the most violent is that their impotence is exposed. The act of speaking is already in itself a resistance to violence, and silence is often a dangerous preamble to the aggression that comes from loss of control. We depend on others all the time. In that sense our freedom and autonomy begin in the other. If you have a series of rights, freedoms, and are subject to justice, but not all other humans are subject to the same principles, so you don't have rights and justice, you have privileges. It is urgent to search again for everything we have in common with the other, everything we share and our deep codependency. Fight for the other, you depend on them. The principle of justice is simple. If not everyone has it, it is not justice, it is privilege. It is so easy to disprove the silly ideology of meritocracy and individualism. It seems almost absurd to me to hear so many people say that the answer lies in you, that you are the master of your own universe and destiny, that your success depends only on you. The present is not only a consequence of the past, the present changes the past. It changes the past not in the real sense, but in the sense of its totality, what the past is in the present. The role played by the past is present at every moment of contemplation of it, and in that sense it is dynamic. Thus, in the future you will be able to turn to the past and see in retrospect that you were able to change your mind and mature. I hope your future doesn't have nights where you can't sleep in shame for the things you blindly defended without knowing exactly why you did it. Life is what happens between the demand that you be better and outstanding and those who tell you to limit yourself and be modest. Sure, the point is that you never please anyone. How could anyone ever be satisfied with you? Could you even always be satisfied with yourself? Or even more so, how could you be satisfied with someone who is satisfied with you? I think the point is that life is a dance of frustration. Or the frustration of doing less and disappointing what you expect of yourself or what others expect of you, or doing more and making yourself uncomfortable with your successes. Sometimes we make the mistake of expecting too much from the ignorant, we say, this time it will be different, this time he will use his sanity. Critical thinking. That for me is something like the ability of the human to interrelate variables that do not have an immediate, obvious, or evident relationship. If only more people could doubt what they think they know and actually try to acquire knowledge autonomously, using their reason and conscience instead of repeating like machines the accepted narrative, we would have another world. I am in favor of the idea that fraternity and empathy should cost us, as a constant reminder that it is not free, it does not come easy and it hurts. We are condemned to more unnecessary conflicts in the name of the enrichment of a few, we are condemned not only to suffering but to extinction. In many criticisms of the capitalist system, this problem was anticipated, the inevitable unequal distribution of resources and wealth generated. We are sick with anxiety because we don't know what is expected of us. Get educated, find a job, accumulate things, form a family, tell your children to do the same and die. Anxiety, according to my favorite author, comes from not knowing what the other expects of us, or what we are or what we should do. His desire is close to us, overwhelming, but at the same time we cannot understand his desire or how to respond to it. Isn't that our frustration today? It seems that the answer to all these questions is hidden behind the consumption or accumulation of money, buy this to feel like this, achieve this to be recognized like this, collect money to have such a thing. Consumerism in capitalism became a process of generating individual identity. What's going on? Why doesn't anything I buy really make me feel like it answers any of those fundamental questions? Because consumption is empty and has no meaning. You are not what you buy, the goal of your life is not to be rich, nobody is happy just because they are CEO. They have sold us a big lie. We do not survive our evolution because we are stronger, more agile, or vile than other species, we survive because we are able to imagine a vision of a collective future that is worth collaborating for. Our desire for distraction and entertainment is directly proportional to our inability to tolerate the social and political reality that entertainment hide. Do you want to see how harsh your reality is? Turn off all your entertainment for one day. What do you have left? Is that tolerable? Could it be that we have so many celebrities that are so vulgar because we are consumers of vulgar content? One aspires and admires what one identifies with. I think that today more than ever we confuse what we have to do to survive with those things that make a life memorable, worthy, and significant. Panic is childish and irresponsible. Fear makes us myopic and forces us to retreat from survival because surviving is not living. No, the poor person is not poor because he wants to, but because his material conditions make it impossible for him to compete or overcome his state of poverty. The few that come out of it are rare, very rare, exceptions. That's why we make movies for them and everyone knows their stories, thus validating injustice. Don't let quarantine and social distance fool you, with certain people it's better to always keep your distance. Not feel compelled to put up with everyone's stupidity, nor force everyone to put up with mine. We are not obliged to empathize with everyone. I prefer to doubt what I am and remain infinite in my possibilities, than hide in a faceless crowd where my individuality is diluted and flattened. Hippocrates said that before curing someone we must ask him if he is willing to abandon what made him sick. Isn't this exactly the paradox of postmodernity? Beware of those who see your sick dependency to perpetually hold you captive by first selling the vice as a cure and then the cure as a vice. The language of success is the language of business, that's why postmodernity does not allow success outside business. In turn, thinking outside of language is impossible, we cannot think in terms that do not exist. Today it happens in a dystopian way in reverse, from school they indoctrinate you to think in that language. The very word success is already loaded with administrative and corporate meanings. Success became that empty drawer that everyone aspires to and that has money as the only common denominator. Money no matter where it came from or what you generated along the way. Everything is forgiven us except being poor. Because the world produces 1.5x the amount of food needed to feed the world. In addition, 30% of said food is wasted prior to its use. This is just one coolly analyzed variable on why capitalism is the cancer of our age. The first step in creating an alternative is to admit that what we have is a piece of shit that is destroying us physically, mentally, and terrestrially, and that we have no old one to go back to. We arrived at a historical moment where the truth is not hidden from people, but people hide themselves from the truth. We live in an age where more money is spent to misinform people than to inform them. We live in a time where we confuse freedom of expression with the equal value of ideas, where your ignorance is worth the same as another's intellect. Today the truth that we have already uncovered falls into the darkness of conspiracy theorists who not only do not allow us to advance, but also deny much of what we have advanced. The cost of ignorance is incalculable.